All right, thank you guys for coming in. Today's class is going to be on positioning. So what positioning entails is where you are. It helps you kind of figure out what you're going to be doing with the space that you have gained. There's a lot of things that's positioning tends to help you out with. What we're going to be looking at specifically is looking at different ways at looking at the map and kind of analyzing a backup plan and a plan of attack, usually on the place that you are on the map. Okay. So let's break it down. Back again, we talked about in the IGL, in the IGL class, we talked a little bit about how the map is broken down between attackers and defenders. Okay, we're gonna just be doing that real quick. So when you're looking at a map, we're gonna be using Split as an example. We're gonna be moving on to another map just so we can see the exact same thing. But let's look at it like this. Each individual map has 3 different areas. Okay, we have the attacker area. Attackers start with this space. You might remember that we talked about it as the green zone. Okay. When we were looking at attackers, if the attackers are doing a really good job of holding all their space, they're going to have a completely large area to work around. Okay. Some spaces might be big, might give your team a lot of space to kind of work around, or it might give you not enough, like something like Lotus, right? So when we're looking at this space, let me go back to Split. It is imperative that you look at how much space you start with so you can look at your options. The opposite works for defenders. You're going to notice that they also start with a lot of space. They have the same idea that you do, but you're going to notice that for defenders, it's really easy to hold with these little choke points right there, but it's also really easy to lose if you lose a player. So for example, 4 players can very easily hold this entire space right there, and it might be left for 2 players to fight the 4. Okay. Because of that reason, everybody is mostly spread out across the map. And even though you have full control of all of this space, it is really easy to lose. So how does positioning tie into this? Well, in order for you to get into any of these 2 zones, we have to look into the middle ground. This is the yellow. The yellow is one of the most contested spots. They're big hot spots on the map, usually at the beginning of the round, and they're the biggest connector between you and the enemy team. When we're looking at something like Split, we can see that a lot of the fights could be done right here. This is a first point of contact, as they call it. This is where you're most likely to find an opponent that wants to get an early pick, and it's very likely you'll find your first opponent that's trying to get greedy. Same thing on mid. You're going to notice that this is a big area for people to fight. Same thing on A. You're going to notice that people tend to kind of fight around this area. Okay, a lot of choke points to kind of deal with. Yellow areas vary depending on the map. So if we have something like Sunset, you can see that the yellow area kind of switches into something like this and something as big as mid. Sometimes there'll be something like Breeze, where the entire space might look very small in the yellow area, or they might be split into different spots like this. You can see that it's a little bit less set in stone, like something like we just showed on Split, where it's just simply just fighting mid, right? For that reason, we're going to be using this as a way to detail what it is that defenders tend to use as a form of positioning themselves better. So in order to do this, we're going to be looking at 3 different colors. We're going to go back to Split. If I can, oh, I'm already split. Okay. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be splitting the zone into 3 different areas. Each site has 3 different zones once they're past the yellow. So let's say that the enemy team, the attackers, have done a really good job of taking over yellow. Then that means that this entire space is no longer safe. So what happens on sites? What happens in the space that they actually have to hold? Both defenders and attackers need to be aware of these 3 zones. The first one is this right here. The second one is right here. And the third one is right here. And we're going to be doing it for A as well. For now, let's just start with B. When you're pushing in, there's always going to be someone that's going to be taking a fight right at the beginning in this main area. This is what we would like to call something like the front line. Okay. When you're playing something like this, defenders can use the front line as a way to kind of rely on a teammate or potentially try to get an easy pick on an opponent that's just trying to push an area. This is what we just like to call the front line. Okay. The front line is one of those positions where as you're playing, you cannot hold it alone. if you've ever tried to hold a position like B or maybe something like A, you are going to be finding yourself that the more exposed you are to the front line, the more likely it is that you're going to die. Your biggest opponents are basically going to be flashes and double swings. In order for you to hold a front line, you need to be aware that you only have a few options. Number one, you have something like a one and done, or you have things like playing with somebody else and holding a cross. The second person doesn't have to be there specifically. You can use things like utility. So if an Omen decides to send you a smoke, this is a form of somebody else helping you hold that front line. Okay, so when you're playing with this, you got to be aware that using the front line is a good way of understanding a big area of danger. So if you find yourself, again, you're going to notice that I did this purposely. You're not necessarily behind the box. You're behind this area right here, right? All of this right here, if I cut around this corner right there, would be considered the front line. A lot of players that are still struggling to understand how to hold a site will find themselves in this position right here. Once you start becoming a little bit better, then you start becoming more aware of where you can stand. But the front line, again, pretty simple. This is just a place where you're essentially going to be in danger if you don't have a backup plan. Characters like Jet, characters like Reyna have an easy backing out piece of utility, like a bailout, get out of jail free card. So they can technically exist in this zone without any problems. Let's talk about the second one, the white. What does this zone represent for you guys? If this is the front line and this is where most of the fights are happening at the beginning, what do you think the white is? Does anyone have any takes?
One would guess the
Someone mentioned controller. Okay, so this could be like a zone for the controller. Is that what you're mentioning? That could be a guess. What else? If this is the front line, this is where most of the things are happening at the beginning. What do you think the white means?
The safety zone?
Yeah, safety zone is perfect. Okay, we'll call this the safe house, the safety area. Okay, you're going to notice that when you're playing as a defender, this is where you tend to rely on the most to be the most safe. So for example, if you're retreating, you're going to find yourself going into stairs in this area right here. You might play around this area right here. Maybe you're getting shot at, but you know the second that you back out, you'll be safe. Okay, it gives you the best chances of survival if people are pushing you. On the opposite side, however, if you're an attacker and you're pushing in, you know that the second you start stepping into the safety zone, you're now more in danger. And this is where you can start thinking of looking at the safety zone as an overextending position. You can look at this as a way of trying to get greedy. Okay, I always tell players that if you're going to be looking into this zone right here, you need to be aware of the consequences, because this is an area that's going to be safe. It's very likely densely populated with opponents. Okay, so be very careful about pushing this area right here. So if this is the safety zone, this is where defenders are mostly going to find themselves the most safe. What is the black? Any takers? What tends to happen in this area the most?
Ratting.
Ratting. I mean, you can use ratting as front line, but I mean, we talked about one and dones with the front line. What can happen?
It'll be more called a dead zone.
Combat zone.
Combat zone. Why is it a combat zone?
Because it depends if they take over site. A lot of players usually fight on behind B or under heaven.
I like
hell,
that.
I mean.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. So I just like to call this like a hotspot. Okay, like this is just generally where a lot of fights are going to happen. This is where plant happens. This is where the majority of the players that are going to be playing for post plant, this is where they're going to find themselves in those sight lines, right? But this is generally where most of the fights are going to occur when you're taking that site. Okay, so let's walk about this really easily. Okay, so let's say you are a Jet player, you're walking in. You know that in order for you to take this place right here, you need to be aware of your front line. So you know that if there's a smoke, there could be potentially someone within these two sides. Positioning wise, you know that if you have a flash, these two spots are easier to take. Because again, like we just mentioned, it is a really hard zone for people to hold unless they have something to get away with. So with this, you can start collecting data. Like there's a Reyna here. She's very likely going to be playing in this front line. Or they have a Cypher. It's very unlikely to find him here. And if he is, he's just going to be playing a one and done. He's not really planning to get away with much, right? oh, they threw a smoke, then it's very likely for this zone to be more populated. But then you start thinking, what are their backup plans? Where are they going to go, right? So this is how we can address the front line right here as a jet. Then you start pushing through. Let's say that nothing happens. You kind of decide to make a move with your team. They flash. This area is now a little bit easier to take. Okay. Now you're worried about the hotspot. Okay. This is where a lot of fights start taking place. Okay. And so you start clearing. And this is where clearing starts to happen. We've talked about clearing before. You clear your sides. The hotspot is now cleared. With the hotspot now cleared, you know that the majority of the fight is now done for the period until spike is planted. If you got any kills, they're going to be around this area. And if you didn't, then that means you know that they're in the safe zones. Okay. So same thing with that. Okay. And this is basically how you can interpret, okay, what's the front line? What's the hotspot? You can figure out where most of the fights are. This is where you need your team the most. And if you decide to be one of those jets that likes to push up, you can't do it alone. Use utility, ask for help, stuff like that. Okay. It's a very easy, very straightforward walkthrough of just understanding these zones, just to understand what's happening. Okay. This is basically a breakdown of how most of those zones work. So let's say, for example, you are someone like KJ and you are lurking alone, and they have someone like Arena. Where is the Arena very likely to play? Are they likely to play in the safe zone? Probably not. Okay, the Arena, they have a bigger chance of having more escape plans. So they're very likely to play between the hot and the front line. Okay, and this is how you can use the positioning of defenders against them, because you know they're going to be playing in positions that, again, they might be just really heavily populated. So you can use someone like, for example, you can use KJ utility to try to flush her out, maybe something like this. Right? You can use turret to kind of flesh out anything else like over here. And then you can start becoming a little bit more aware of where she might be. You can use the process of elimination by using an understanding of how this zone works. Okay. And then you progress on to the next one and the next one. As a lurker, obviously, you're not going to find yourself pushing this just because. You're probably going to use it if you know that there's people rotating off. So at that point in time, you're going to be safe. But that is a breakdown of understanding these three zones. Does anyone have any questions in regards to these three zones? None? Perfect. Okay, we're going to be doing the exact same thing over on A. And then we're going to be switching it a little bit over to attackers so we can have a slightly better idea on how to make plans and make adjustments in the game. Okay, so let's say, for example, we're looking at this right here. Again, yellow zone. We know that's the case, right? But we move past that. Okay, let's look at what the front line might be. And I want you guys to think about it like this. Okay, if you guys want, we can look at that later. Okay, who wants to take a crack at creating a front line, a hotspot, and a safe zone? I'm more than willing to give you guys the link. You guys can kind of hop in and you can draw the white, the black, and the blue. Does anyone want to take a crack at it? Before
Sure.
I go, you want to go for it? Okay, I'm going to send you the link over, and it's in general, not in general, it's in Val Training. Go ahead and try it. Okay. And I'm going to give you a hint. It starts from here, and it ends right here. Yeah, I'm not sure why the link is eggsy. Yep. Let me know when you're in. And for anyone that's kind of just watching, try to understand what the zones are. Okay, so that's blue. Go ahead and try black. So front line right there. And then last, the zone, the safe zone. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. You're going to notice something in particular about the way, and then we have a chamber. So you're going to notice something in particular about the way that this zone was created. Okay. First things first. Okay. Let's look at it like this. When you are playing for site, okay, do you find yourself safe on site? Yes or no?
Yeah.
The answer is going to be yes. The problem is, what happens if people are pushing at you? This is an area that is now going to be contested. Okay. And because it is going to be contested, this is going to be a lot more difficult for you to hold. Okay. So just to kind of break down your thought process here, the front line was good. All right. I think this is Jolty and Facade. I'm going to request that you guys stop. Yep. I know that's you guys. So what's going to happen is from this line right here, okay, you're going to notice that the safe zone is basically where the team is going to be the most safe. This is where the second the enemy team pushes, they're going to be in trouble. Okay. So something like this. So let me just kind of break it down. Your front line was actually correct, by the way. I'm actually going to make a slight adjustment to it. It would be more like this. Because again, the front line would mostly revolve around the site wherever the site starts. Okay. So let's start again from the beginning. Your front line assessment was correct. It's generally where the choke points lie. Okay. So you had a really good understanding of that. So let's say, for example, if you're playing Jet and you're playing right here, then you know that you're basically playing a one and done if your dash is out. Okay. So you have to plan ahead. Do I have smokes to bail me out? Do I have someone to help me hold this cross right here? Right? Do we have those things to make a plan? Right? So those things that need to be kept in mind when you're playing this zone. When you're playing into the hotspot, that's generally where most of the fights are going to occur. Not every site is the same. You're going to notice that B on split is really easy to break down. But then you have something like do we talk about like heaven? Do we talk about site? Most of the time, if site does not have an easy escape plan like this, okay, it's generally a hotspot. And we're going to give you an example over here. Let's say, for example, Ascent. A lot of people tend to believe that this is a really safe zone. But in reality, what's going to happen? You have no escape plan. This is not really safe. Okay, so I request you stop. Request you stop. So this is where you need to start looking at it as this is no longer a safe zone. This is actually a hotspot. Okay, this is where most of the fights are going to take place. That means that this area right here would be your safe zone. Interpret safe zones as CT. Interpret safe zones as those areas where you have the best chance of success and survival, where your team can help you the most. Okay, so using that same idea, we can look at this area like this as more of a safe zone. You can get out this way, right? You can come out into CT. Okay. Hotspots, like we mentioned, it's the big combat zones. And this is why this area right here would be okay, would be considered the hot zone right here, the hotspot. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Yeah, wouldn't market be a safe zone also on Ascent A site?
Let me see.
Or no?
Market?
Yeah,
This right here?
yeah. Assuming you have something for mid, like a chamber chip or alarm bot.
So you would say that this is a safe zone? Well, the way that I would like you to look at it is notice how we did split and notice how we split it up like this. We did a B and we did an A. Notice how mid wasn't included in that type of zone right there. If we were looking at it in terms of how does mid work, you're going to notice that these would be considered your safe zones if you're playing mid, right? Because you're getting out this way. So if we were looking at in terms of B, going back to Ascent, you're going to notice that you can come this way and that would be your safe zone. But the second that you turn into mid, you now need to consider that this is now a hotspot, right? It's one of those things that the second that you transcend from one lane to the next and you move on and you transition from one lane to the next, it starts becoming a lot more problematic. So you got away from one fight, you now need to get ready for the next. And that's essentially one of the problems that a lot of players have when they're moving from position to position, because they'll move from here and they'll move back and they'll think that they're safe because they kept away from the danger. But in reality, they're basically stuck and they have no backup plan, right? So if your way was thinking of moving like this, then yeah, that would be 100% correct. But if you're doing it with the intention of moving this way, you're not really super safe because this area is going to be in danger. People can push you, okay? So I understand where your question and your confusion comes from. So the way that you need to think about it is the second that you're the safest possible way, like you're in the safest possible zone, that would be your safety area, your safety net, okay? So interpret it like this instead. Does that answer your question? If anyone still has confusions about this, we have to kind of break this down. Any other questions? Okay, no questions? Perfect. Let's talk about finishing with one final thing. So here are some tips that I have for players that are kind of struggling with getting good positioning. Okay, we've talked about pathing in the past. So one of the ways that you need to start looking at positioning is it's not just in general with, hey, I'm going to be taking this spot right here. I'm going to be doing something with just moving from one safety zone to the next. It's also what you're using from piece to piece when you're kind of going from one zone to the next. So going back to split, you're going to notice that when I use the front line, I basically put it in a position where there's no cover. Okay, of course, you can do things like I mentioned in this spot right here, where I essentially told you if you're Jet and you don't have dash, right, you can use something like a smoke for cover. If you're playing over here and you have an Omen, Omen can give you a little bit more cover and you can kind of work around it, right? But at the end of the day, when you're picking positioning, I want you to instead choose to pick locations with natural cover. Okay, it's a very obvious position to be in. But let's say, for example, you're playing Jet. Again, I'm going to bring Jet back. And you have activated your dash. And you are in this area right here. I find that a lot of players don't think about this. But this area right here is cover. This area right here has cover. And they don't plan ahead of time. And they're out in the open without their dash. Right? This is one example, right, of thinking about your natural cover when you're looking at your abilities. For example, you're someone like Omen. And you really don't have an escape plan and you're standing right in the middle. You're not really moving towards cover. You're not playing around these corners, right? This is a good example of how you're not thinking about natural cover when you're moving from position to position, right? This is something that it comes really naturally to some people that play FPSs. They're aware that they need to move from one area to the next without being exposed to multiple angles, okay? When it comes to positioning, not only do you have to think about what area you're at, and how dangerous the area is, but at the same time, whether you are safe from that zone or not, if something unexpected were to occur. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about natural cover in order for positioning to work? None. One last thing. Okay, we talked about zones. We have a good understanding of kind of breaking down all these things. The position that we just covered today will come back. We will talk about it in another way for entry. Okay, but one thing that you guys need to make sure that you are using when you're trying to get good positioning is having a backup plan. Okay, so we're going to be using Brim as an example for this right here. So let's say you're playing Brim. The context of whether your team is there or not doesn't really matter. I want you to think more specifically about where the enemy is positioning and what exactly it is that you should be doing about it. So the opposing team has a Cypher and they have a Jet. The Jet is currently opping. They could be anywhere. They haven't been showing in the same position. Okay. A lot of the times they could start A, they could start B, they could start mid. Okay. So the way that your team is thinking about it is we're going to go B, right? Whether there's 3 players, 1 player, doesn't really matter. How should you think about this zone right here, and how should you think about taking B? Well, the first thing that you're going to be doing is, okay, well, this is the main area where people tend to fight. This is not a safe place because of the op. The op could start here. The Sentinel could start here, maybe trying to get a pick. Either way, this is no longer a safe zone. In order to use this properly, we have to clear it. You can use things like flashes. You can use things like jump peeking. Okay, you can use all of these things in order to clear this area. Once this area has been cleared, then this is no longer a problematic zone. You start moving into another area. Now that you're moving in through, we start to pay attention to the next problem, and that is the front line. Okay, is Jet holding with a really close angle right here? Is she using her op? Is she using her dash? This is a spot that we have to be paying attention to. Are they playing across, right? And this is where you can start thinking about, do we push out? If there's a smoke there, do we wait the smoke out, right? This is when you can start paying attention as to why the smoke really matters in the first place and why this is problematic. But you have a flash and you say to yourself, we can clear this area right here. Since you know that the op could be potentially on B and they could be potentially on anywhere else in the site, you start thinking about what is the problem. And you think to yourself, if the front lane can be cleared with a flash, how do we clear the hotspot? And this is where the rest of the team starts coming in. You start putting down your smokes. You get rid of a little bit of this area right here. You start thinking about this area back there. And then your KJ decides to throw some mollies back there to clear it up. You're going to notice that over time, the hotspot starts being shaved off. And the chances of the enemy being in this spot right here are either higher or they're going to be 0. Because they're going to either be condensed into one spot or they're going to be out into the safe zone. Okay. Using this, you can basically use an understanding of how the enemy might reposition to basically get a jump on the opponent. Okay. This is how site executes tend to work the best. And this is how you can use it to sort of deduct where the enemy is going to be if you haven't found them yet. Does anyone have any questions about the example that I just showed? No questions? Okay. Okay, so that's basically it. That's it for, like, again, just a pretty bare bones guide, but I need you guys to really understand those 3 zones when you guys are planning ahead of time. I find a lot of you just not understanding that you guys are in a frontline zone without a backup plan. Oops. Okay. I find that a lot of you don't find yourselves having a plan. I notice that a lot of you guys stand in really dangerous spots like this one, and you guys don't really think about the fact that the enemy might know that you're already there, or the fact that you're kind of out of options. Okay. So I want you guys to look at those zones. I want you guys to think about your positioning. Okay. So with that out of the way, we're going to call it here. We're going to be bringing entry and we're going to be bringing mid-rounding in future rounds of coaching. So look out for those. I believe they're going to be coming in soon. We have one that might potentially happen this next Thursday. So if you guys really want that one, we'll be doing that. Do you have any questions before we close this off? Last minute?
We're good.